I'm going to talk about four things that I hear the opposition always saying about the Thai monarchy, and I'm going to explain why it's absolutely wrong. But before I do that, I want to make two things clear. Number one, Thai politics is the business of Thai people and Thai people alone, and I, as an American, am only talking about it because my government is funding the core organizations behind the anti-government protests. And if you don't believe me, just go to the U.S. government website, National Endowment for Democracy, ned.org, go to regions, go to Asia, scroll down to Thailand, and you will see a full list of all the core organizations involved in driving these protests, the dollar amounts of U.S. government money they're all receiving to carry out sedition inside Thailand. So if you don't want an American talking about Thai politics, the opposition needs to stop taking money from my government, and I will stop talking about it. And number two, I want to make something else really clear. When I talk about the protests, I'm not talking about these kids being drawn out into the streets. Okay, I'm talking about the protest leaders and the organizations, the core organizations behind the protests. We were all young. We all remember what it was like to be rebellious, to question things, to challenge things. This is a natural part of being a human being, of growing up. We all went through it. So we should try to be patient with these kids, and we should try to focus on the people who are exploiting them and taking that phase that we always go through and grow up out of, and they're exploiting it and they're weaponizing it to destroy the country. Okay, so I want to make those two things real clear. Now, I got the list here, and I'm going to talk about each one. I'm going to try to do it as quickly as possible to keep this short. Number one is the taxes going to the royal household. The Thai king is the head of state. Every country, without exception, around the globe allocates, money from the national budget to the head of state so that they can carry out their official duties, and Thailand is no exception. When this money is going to the royal household, it's not just going to the king, it's going to a large number of people who support him in him doing those duties. Those are all jobs that people have, money that they're using to support their family, and money that goes back into the Thai economy. So it's not like the king is just taking this money from the Thai people. It's just ridiculous. It makes no sense. And another thing is the amount of money that the Thai king gets. Thanathorn, this billionaire opposition leader, is always on about 8.9 billion Thai baht, which sounds like a huge number. But when you look at what percentage of the national budget that is, it's 0.27%. It's not even half of 1%, because the national budget is 3.2 trillion Thai baht. Okay? So right there, just look at that. They intentionally present that to the protesters, leaving out all of this context just to get them upset, just to upset them and turn them against the monarchy. When even if they were somehow able to get rid of the monarchy, that money would still have to go to whoever was the head of state. So it's not like the money would be spent on something else. It would still go to the head of state for them to perform their duties. There's no country that doesn't have a head of state. Number two, let's just go to number two. There are these accusations that the king somehow organized the death or the disappearance of this activist, Wan Chalern. All right. There's absolutely no evidence one way or the other of what happened to Wan Chalern. He was nobody when he was in Thailand. He fled to Cambodia. He was even less of anyone when he was in Cambodia. The government or the monarchy had absolutely nothing to gain by him disappearing or dying. He was a very minor figure in the opposition movement. So to do anything to him would just risk turning him from nobody into like a very visible martyr for the opposition to rally around, which would be more of a motivation for the opposition to have had him disappear. So, look, if you don't trust your government and you don't trust the Thai monarchy, okay, that's fine. But if people make accusations, demand evidence. And if they don't have evidence, start to ask yourself why that might be, why they might be making accusations without any sort of evidence. And ask yourself, is this really a movement that you want to be a part of, a movement that says things but can never prove it? Number three, what has the Thai king done for Thailand? That's something the opposition leaders love to say all the time. What has he done for Thailand? They portray him like he's some sort of parasite just feeding off of the country. Well, while the protesters were blocking roads in Bangkok, vandalizing public property, costing Thai people tax dollars to clean it up and repair it. The Thai king was up country rallying support for flood victims. And the Royal Thai Army was out there with all their resources, their vehicles, all of their infrastructure, their manpower, helping people evacuate from their homes, helping evacuate livestock, helping move valuables up to high ground. And they were doing all of this while the protesters were blocking roads in Bangkok, costing people, money and time and patience, mocking the king and the military. Okay, so what has the king done for Thailand? Well, he was just helping flood victims. What were the protest leaders doing? And in a very general sense, what has the monarchy ever done for Thailand? It has protected the country for 700 years. It's the only country in Southeast Asia never colonized by the West. Colonization works by entering a country, dividing the people, and then conquering the divided country. It's a very basic strategy. And because Thailand's king has always been a unifying force among Thai people, the West was never able to accomplish this. So that's why Thailand was the only country in the region not to be colonized. So past and present, the king has done quite a bit for Thailand. And again, just ask the protest leaders, what are you doing for Thailand? Number 4, the king has too much power and he must be reined in under the constitution. Well, the Thai king is already part of a constitutional monarchy. And this complaint comes from the billionaire-led opposition behind these protests, Thaksin Shinawatra and Thanathorn Juangruangkit. The Thai military and its ability to orchestrate a coup to remove a government that is out of control, killing people, trampling the law, and openly ignoring court decisions. This is like, when the police and the courts cannot remove a government that has committed crimes, the military is the last resort. And this is a check and balance in Thai society that has probably saved the country at least twice. The last 2 coups were absolutely necessary. People like to complain about the 2014 coup, but they don't like to talk about how Yingluck Shinawatra was literally just holding the seat of prime minister for her brother, who was remotely running the country from his hotel room in Dubai. It was ridiculous. No other country would accept that. And in addition to that, she ran the country into the ground with her rice scheme. They took rice from 1 million farmers, put it in government warehouses to rot, and they never paid them. It was like 6 months. Who can afford to not get paid for their work for 6 months? Nobody. And then when protesters were out in the streets, Yingluck Shinawatra's government was murdering them. Up to 20 people died. So it's funny how you have all these human rights groups now among the opposition talking about violence against the protesters, the police spraying them with water and pushing them with plastic shields. Where were they in 2014 when Yingluck Shinawatra's government was actually murdering people in the streets? So it's hypocrisy. And this last point about reining in the king's power is just so that people like Thaksin Shinawatra and Thanathorn Juangruangkit can just come back into power and have no one there to stop them. So it's a very selfish, self-serving demand. And they use all of these lies and rumors about the king and how he does nothing. And they just, they're preying on these kids who are by nature rebellious. They're just preying on them, turning them against the king just so that they can remove this obstacle for they themselves to just come into power. So keep all of those things in mind. I don't think that it's going to change the mind of protesters for them to see this video. I remember when I was a kid, how stubborn I was, and I accept that. But what I would hope is that people around these protesters, if they're your friends or they're your family, you can at least plant a little seed in their mind so that as they grow up and they mature a little bit, or they start to see kind of cracks in the narrative of these protest leaders, or if they check the U.S. government funding and they were like, wow, they are funded by the U.S. government. Why are they lying about it to us? Why are our leaders lying to us? That seed will grow. And it's okay for them to question the government and to hold the government accountable for many things. But what this is about, what the protest leaders and the foreign government funding them, what this is about is just dividing and destroying Thailand, to finally divide and destroy the country the way Western empires have tried and failed for over 700 years. Just keep that in mind.